Hey guys, let's talk about Warmogs on the new patch. So Warmogs just received a nerf, which we kind of figured would come in because Riot didn't really want supports building Warmogs as a first item. And, so let's talk about that. So pre-nerf, you needed 1300 bonus HP in order to activate Warmog's passive. Now post-nerf, you need 1500. And you can kind of think about that. That's not really that big of a change to only need an extra 200 HP. And since we were already getting well over it in order to activate it right when we got Warmogs first on support, what really do you need to do in order to get it? And so here's some interesting stuff about that. Number one, if you think about how to get enough HP in order to do it, what we can take a look at is that there are ways to get there, to the 1500 HP, even if you want to build Warmogs as a first item. So I think Warmogs is still totally viable as a first item on support, just on the face of it, because there's ways that you can use your runes in order to basically get there anyways. Now, even if you don't want to change your runes too much in order to get there, I still think it's fine as a first item because you only need to complete it and then pick up a ruby crystal on top of it in order to have enough HP with, a regular rune page on support in order to be able to activate Warmogs anyways. And so it's not like you have to complete a whole nother item before it works, and so you have to build it second. It's still totally fine to build it first and then just pick up the ruby crystal to be able to activate the passive. So let's talk about how we can get enough HP to activate it without even needing a ruby crystal after we complete Warmogs, so that we can just get the item online right away. Now, basically, the item itself is going to give you 1000 HP, and then you're going to get 200 HP from your support item. So we need to get to 1500 HP, which means we need an extra 300 HP from somewhere else. Well, we have 3 runes that are pretty commonly run anyways that are going to be able to give us health, which is Overgrowth, Flat Health, and a Scaling Health rune. And these together will not quite give you enough to get Warmogs, but depending on when you're able to complete Warmogs at, if you take double Scaling Health, you'll take a little bit of a hit in the early game by not having quite as much HP before level 7. But once you hit level 7, you'll actually end up with more HP anyways, and by the time you complete Warmogs, you should have enough health that Overgrowth plus the 2 health scaling runes should actually just get you there with the support item and Warmogs. So let's talk about why that is. So Overgrowth gives you extra maximum HP for every 8 minions that die around you, and you gain 3 maximum health. And then it does additional max health. It increases your maximum HP by 3.5% once you've absorbed 120 monsters. So if we take 120 divided by the 3 max health that we're getting, or actually, so you take 120 divided by 8, and then we multiply that by 3 max health for each of those 8 minions that die, you get 45 health from Overgrowth. And then once you've gotten that to that point where you've gotten 45 bonus health from Overgrowth, it's going to increase your maximum HP by 3.5%. So, this is going to depend on the champion and what level you're at. But if we just think about like Braum on level 9, for example, at level 9, Braum has 1,365 health, and he's got 1,000 if you're completing Warmogs, and he's got 200 from his support item. And at level 9, you're going to have 90 from each of these scaling health runes. So you're going to have 2,745 HP, which is being increased by 3.5%, which is an additional 96 HP. So you have, then to go back to what we need for Warmogs, we have 1,000 from Warmogs. We have 200 from our support item. We have the 96 that we got from Overgrowth once it's completed, which it should be by the time that you get Warmogs. And then 90 at level 9 from both of the scaling health runes, so 180 from that. And that gets us to 1,476 HP. So we're just shy. We're off by just 24 HP. Now, obviously you get 10 HP per level with these scaling health runes. So let's say level 10 instead. Then you're going to be 4 HP off, but you've gained 20 health. That's going to be increased by 3.5. That's only giving you 0.7. Yeah, so you'd have to be level 11 actually. Although, no, at level 10 you would get it because you gain some additional base health that's being increased by a lot as well. So at level 10 on Braum, with double scaling health runes and overgrowth completed, you will be able to activate Warmogs even without a ruby crystal. And since like you're probably buying Warmogs right around level 10 anyways, you could just switch to a double scaling health instead of a flat health here, and make sure that you can kind of activate it right away as soon as you buy it. Now, let's say that you don't take these runes. You don't want to give up the flat health, and you end up, you know, either maybe you get it early, and so you're not level 10 yet because you're ahead and you get the item really early. Of course, you can delay buying it a little bit by buying boots and other things like that anyways. So you're quite likely to get it at level 10 no matter what. But let's say that you want to get the item earlier, you're buying it early or whatever. If you get it earlier, then you can take the same rune page and, like I said, just buy a ruby crystal afterwards. And so sure, the item's not going to have its active available until your next recall, but it's really not that big of a deal. And this is something that's really important to keep in mind. Warmogs is mostly good because of the health that it gives you, because of how much health the item gives you, not because of its passive. Huge amount of power in the item is just ignoring the passives and the actives, right? Compared to Locket, Warmogs makes you 13.5% tankier, cost adjusted, right? It's even more than that if you don't do the cost adjustment, obviously, but you should do the cost adjustment. So if you go like Locket and then a Giant's Belt versus Warmogs, which are the same cost, Warmogs is making you 13.5% tankier. So even not having access to the passive at all for one recall is really not that big of a deal. It's not like we have to go at second item. It's not like we have to complete a second item in order to activate it or anything like that. You just need one ruby crystal, and that's really easy to pick up afterwards anyways, building into your next item. So now I want to take a look at how the item's performing in terms of stats. And so we can look here at some of the stats. And we're going to take a look at Braum, Leona, and Nautilus, which are really common users. And we can see that people are still preferring to build Warmogs most of the time. And like I said, Warmogs should have a higher win rate than Locket because Locket is cheaper. And so if you're completing... well, I guess in this case, actually, we're looking at a 3-item build. So if we're comparing, you know, like a Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow to like a Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow, where would that be? I don't actually see that one. Oh, here we go. So you can see that these are the same cost build. Of course, we don't have a huge sample size yet on the patch. This is globally. That's why maybe we'll be better off taking a look at Lolalytics, because we can see at each item completion rather than here. I mean, so you would want to compare comparable builds. So like you could compare Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow to Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow. These are going to have the same cost, and yet the Warmogs first, despite the nerf to Warmogs and it not activating right away, is still winning about 2% more than this build. Although you have a low sample size of games. 147 games versus 381 is not a whole lot. When we're talking about, you know, a difference in... Or actually, we were looking at this one, 108 games. When we're talking about a difference in win rate between, you know, these sample sizes of like 2%, remember that that's like 2 games flipping the other direction, you know, in this sample. And so it's really easy. The next two people, or the next two games that somebody builds locket Warmogs in Emerald Plus, you know, I do that a lot. I could, if I win my next two games, all of a sudden this one has the same win rate or higher win rate than this one. So you get the idea, right? Like, not super reliable. Now the problem with Lolalytics is that we're not really cost adjusting. So we can see that if we pick up Warmogs as a first item on, this is Leona we're looking at. Let's look at Braum. We have a 55.64% win rate, and we've got a 52.83% win rate on Locket. But, of course, that's not cost adjusted, so it's really kind of hard to say. You know, we could compare it to last patch and see if it's making any difference compared to last patch, and I really don't think that it is. So if we look at the last patch, if we built Warmogs first, we had a 55.81%. Let's write this down and let's see what they're at. 55.81% compared to 52.9%. So you've got a 2.1% higher win rate for Warmogs, and that's fine. Keep in mind that it's, you know, like I've been saying, it's a more expensive item, so it's going to have a higher win rate if you're actually able to complete that item and then the game suddenly ends. You're more likely to have more gold than the person who's just completed Locket. So it's going to have a higher win rate. On this patch, we're looking at 55.57% win rate versus 52.82. So Locket's win rate on this patch is about the same, 52.9 versus 52.8. So it's gone down a little bit on this patch, 52.82, but really, you know, 0.082%. Or 0.08%. So very small. And then Warmogs went from 55.81% to 55.57%. So it did drop by 0.3%, but not a huge drop. And so we have a spread of 2.75 instead of 2.91, but really barely any difference from last patch. Same thing, you know, I'm sure if we look at Leona here, we've got 55.93 versus a win rate here on Locket of 52.76. So that's going to be a difference of 3.17. If we go back to the previous patch on Leona and take a look, we had 56.39 versus a 52.67. So the spread also fell, you know, from 3.72 to 3.17 on Leona over the patch. So there's definitely a noticeable difference. You know, obviously Warmogs is a little bit nerfed, and so its performance is doing a little bit worse, but not by much. On Nautilus, we had 52.44 compared to 50.21, which is a 2.23 spread. And then if we go back to the previous patch, 53.86 minus 50.54 was a 3.32 spread. So, you know, it also went down on Nautilus 1.09%. That was the biggest change, I think. So, you know, to conclude, I basically think that the nerf to Warmogs is fine because it doesn't force you to build Warmogs second or to build another item first or anything like that. You just, you know, maybe adjust your runes a little bit so that at level 10, you'll have the item whether you can buy a ruby crystal or not. So if you're picking it up at level 10, you should just be good if you adjust to a second scaling health rune. If you're playing you know, without that scaling health rune, you just pick up a ruby crystal, and so, you know, you have one back where the Warmog's passive isn't active. But it just goes to show again that the Warmog's passive is really not the thing that's like driving the item up like crazy. It's the fact that the item is making you so much tankier early on in the game by providing so much HP. So you can totally still build the item, totally still viable. And in fact, we continue to see, right, that Warmogs is potentially as good or outperforming Locket. Now, I do want to leave you with this. Keep in mind that just because Warmogs has a higher win rate here doesn't mean that it's better than Locket, because it's a higher cost item. Now, if we compare here like we did Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow to Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow, we can get a comparison, but when we're only talking about 108 games on the patch versus 381, it's kind of difficult to make a comparison. Let's go back and look at the last patch so we have a little bit more data and see if we can make a similar comparison. So we have Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow, which had a 66% win rate. So what about like a Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow? Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow had a 67% win rate. So again, Locket actually had a higher win rate here. These are two 3-item builds that have been completed, and so there's no longer a issue with cost involved. And so by looking at these 3-item builds, obviously Braum had a higher win rate if he went Locket first and Warmog second. So, keep those things in mind, right? On the current patch, like I said, if you're working with a sample size of 100 games, 2 wins or losses one way is going to change the win rate by, 2%. It can even swing it by 4%, right, up or down. So, this is just not a good enough sample size to really tell. Let's take a look on Leona here. On Leona, Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow again has a 65.55% win rate. If we compare the same build, except we reverse Locket and Warmogs, same thing. Already on this patch, Locket first has a higher win rate than, with the exact same 3-item build. Locket first into Warmog second has a slightly higher win rate, about 0.5%, compared to Warmogs first. If we go to the last patch on Leona, see Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow, 64% win rate. Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow trailing behind by about 0.4%. So actually on Leona, Warmogs first on the last patch was doing a little bit better. On this patch so far, but again, small sample size, so far leaning towards Locket first. So this is essentially what I've been saying about Warmogs when we were looking into it on the last patch and the patch before that, is Warmogs is kind of up in the air. It's totally possible that that Locket is just as good first as Warmogs, and it's really close. I would say then, if you recognize that that's the situation, Locket's going to be better into burst, obviously, where you can make really good use of the active, and Warmogs is not going to be good versus that, potentially better versus poke. So, if you take those circumstances into account, and they're pretty similar in power level, if you're building Locket when you feel like you can get more use out of the active against certain teams that do a lot of damage at once, very bursty teams, or building Warmogs if they're not, slash if they have a lot of poke, that could help you go back and forth between building Warmogs first and building Locket first, which is actually what I've been doing. Now on Nautilus, Warmogs Locket Knight's Vow, 59.6% win rate, and Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow has a 60% win rate, so slightly higher on this patch. But again, 135 game sample size, so when we're talking about a difference of 0.4% in win rate, we're really going to need a bigger sample size to see which one's actually better. Again, they're quite comparable. Here on Nautilus on the last patch, Warmogs, then Locket, then Knight's Vow had a 64.77% win rate, and Locket Warmogs Knight's Vow had a 65.27% win rate. So again, when you cost adjust, Locket first was actually outperforming on Nautilus as well on the last patch. And of course, Warmogs has been nerfed, so you may, experience a back where you don't have access to the passive, or you may have to take a less optimal rune in order to make sure Warmogs activates, so you get less downside with Warmogs passive, but a little bit of downside in your early health in lane. And, but you may decide that trade-off is worth it. But so as a result, we can clearly see that Locket and Warmogs are very comparable still. I think if they want to prevent supports from building this first, I think that they're going to need to make it so that you can't build it unless you're building it as a second item again, which is, we'll see if they're actually willing to do something like that. So for now, I would go back and forth between building, locket first if they have a lot of burst, and Warmogs first if they don't. Hope that this helps you guys understand how you can get the Warmogs passive off and what the effect of the nerf was. And good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.